Hello, and welcome to a presentation that is intended to describe a path by which I enjoy exploring David Lynch's 2001 film Mulholland Drive, voted by film critics in 2016 to be the #1 film of the 21st century. I would like to describe something of my own journey of how I experienced the film and perhaps introduce other viewers to another wonderful way to experience this unusual film. A film that has had such an unexpectedly positive impact on my own life and that I may touch on at some point. Now, when I first viewed Mulholland Drive during the original theatrical release, I thought of it as a strange but conventional narrative story of a young woman's emotional destruction as a result of her seeking fame and fortune as a wannabe actress in Hollywood. And by conventional, I mean a fictional story of characters existing within our physical world as we might typically expect in a film, as opposed to a highly symbolic work of expressionistic art. And that conventional narrative indeed is a valid way to view the film, but at least for me, it never really became clear or resolved unless I imagined and created events that are not seen and thus not part of the film. Now, that view for me remained largely a confusing experience and unclear as to what Diane's ultimate fate was, perhaps suicide or mental breakdown. It felt incomplete and unfulfilling. This initial interpretation seemed essentially a stereotypical view of an imagined dark side of the film industry, done in a rather convoluted manner. Uh, it seemed weak in a way. It was interesting, but somewhat pointless, like an incomplete puzzle. Somehow I believed Lynch was creating a more meaningful film that could be appreciated without making up imaginary events. I felt certain that there could be a deeper meaning and a more fulfilling way to perceive the film. I spent years discussing on IMDB and developed various solutions to explain what was occurring on screen. And eventually, I began focusing on David Lynch, learning more about his life and personal interest. I read his writings and interviews. There were two things about him especially that intrigued me and began to lead me to discover what seemed a more satisfying way to experience the film. First, as a young art student, David Lynch had some interest in expressionistic art, which I would say he continues to this day with his various art projects, well, including film too. Um, Expressionism might be thought of as giving some physical form to non-physical concepts like feelings, emotions, mental states of mind, and other concepts. To express the non-physical through artistic works such as paintings, poetry, films, plays, and so forth. I believe David often speaks and writes in metaphor, and it is possible to go beyond his actual words to try to gain a better sense of what he means. He avoids explaining to people how best to perceive his artistic work. Now, as an art student, he began to explore what he calls moving paintings by combining his painting with sculpture and film. Six Men Getting Sick 6 Times, The Grandmother, and Eraserhead are all early efforts that garnered him some attention. A second element that I found intriguing is his decades-long devotion to transcendental meditation. He has practiced it twice a day for decades, and it is the focus of the David Lynch Foundation that exists solely to promote the meditative practice. David has described in detail how meditation has had such a profound positive transformation on his life. He has spent a great deal of time and energy advocating transcendental meditation. Additionally, he has described in detail the mental process of meditation as a unified field of consciousness in which you dive within yourself, in order to transcend through levels of consciousness to a single point of awareness, or pure bliss, as he calls it.
Transcend, you go beyond thought. You just experience pure consciousness. It's like silence, but lively silence. It's like dynamic. And when you come out of there, the dive in is like that, but when you come out, the splash of that diving in is bliss. Bliss.
I'm really, sort of simplifying the concept of traveling through an outer and inner consciousness, but it's relevant to how I began to imagine the film. I suggest people should learn about Lynch's thinking if they have interest in understanding his work. There's a great deal that can be gleaned in his writings and interviews. He is not simply telling a story, but in my opinion, artistically expressing his own personal philosophy.
At the base of all matter and mind, there is a field that quantum physics calls the unified field, the big treasury, ocean of consciousness, being, the kingdom of heaven, the Tao, home of total knowledge, home of all the laws of nature, the self with a capital S, know thyself. This is this treasury within every human being at the very, very deepest level. And contacting that deepest level, experiencing that, means you can infuse some and grow in that, expand consciousness and all positive qualities. And one of those qualities is peace. So people experience more and more inner peace.
Fulfillment. And the key is, like I said, in that field within, that treasury within. And Transcendental Meditation, just the key that opens the door to that, easily and effortlessly. It's an ancient form of meditation, so profoundly beautiful for the human being. And it's easy only because the tendency of the human being is to always want to go to fields of greater happiness. So once you're pointed within, it's like a magnet pulls you to the field of infinite happiness. And it's so beautiful and so important. It's a stress buster and many, 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 many other glorious things. But the David Lynch Foundation was set up to give Transcendental Meditation first to any student who wanted it anywhere in the world, and now pretty much to any person who wants it anywhere in the world.
And Maharishi Mahesh Yogi teaches a technique called Transcendental Meditation. It's a simple, easy, effortless technique, yet supremely profound, that allows any human being to dive within, experiencing subtler levels of mind and intellect, and transcend and experience this ocean of pure consciousness. This pure consciousness is called by modern physics the unified field. It's at the base of all mind and all matter. And they now say, modern science says, all of matter, everything that is a thing, emerges from this field. And this field has qualities like bliss, intelligence, creativity, universal love, energy, peace. And it's not the intellectual understanding of this field, but the experiencing of it that does everything. And the final outcome of this growth of consciousness is called enlightenment. And enlightenment is the full potential of all of us human beings. And a side effect of enlivening this consciousness is negativity starts to recede. When I started meditating, I was filled with anxieties, filled with fears, kind of a depression and anger. And I took this anger out on my first wife, and after 2 weeks of meditation, she comes to me and she says, "What's going on?" And I was quiet for a moment because it could have been any number of things she might have been referring to. But I finally said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "This anger, where did it go?" And I didn't even realize it had lifted.
Once I began acquiring some basic knowledge of Lynch and his interest in meditation, it pointed me towards Buddhism and general Eastern philosophy. Now the film gradually opened to new levels of interpretational understanding and awareness that began to correspond to Buddhist philosophical concepts. I began to perceive it as a journey from an outer physical real-world story to an increasingly non-physical allegory of an inner mental experience that could be related to meditation and even the unified field of consciousness Lynch has described. A basic belief in Buddhism and much of Eastern-oriented philosophy is that desire leads to suffering. And this is a concept which, on some levels, this film can be imagined to artistically portray. Related to that is the idea that mankind typically exists in a perpetual cycle of desire and suffering, in which we seek to satisfy a desire or craving, and once satisfied, soon experience another, never achieving any permanent state of contentment or happiness or enlightenment that is called nirvana. Buddhism offers a path to end the cycle and achieve enlightenment. In this context, the term suffering refers to all forms of discontent, such as anxiety, want, hunger, craving, jealousy, hate, anger, obsession, lust, and so forth. Now, perhaps the word jitterbug might be used to symbolize a form of suffering, and we might think the opposite of jitterbug as calmness, inner peace, serenity, or pure bliss. In my journey, I believe I came upon the single mind point of view before I was able to perceive the connection of meditation. There was a moment that was like an epiphany, where I began to instantly perceive all of the characters as mental aspects of a single generic mind interacting within an entirely non-physical mental landscape. Little people inside our heads, acting out the mental activities occurring within the subconscious mind. Now, one nice example in the film to understand this concept of characters representing mental events occurring inside the mind is the character credited in the credits as Back of Head Man, who answers a phone call from Mr. Roke. We are shown the back of a not-so-little man's head, framed by a classical-looking arch, who speaks minimally in a communication process. This can be interpreted as a wonderfully creative, yet simple way to represent the man in the back of the head, who may tell us what to do. We are informed in the credits the character's name is Back of Head Man, which suggests the man in the back of the head. Now, he's framed in a classical arch, and this arch can suggest the head or mind, and can then be used as a symbol to be recognized in other places in the film to reinforce the concept where we see arches used. And they're used in Sierra Bonita, Paramount Studios, Ed's office, Havenhurst, Mr. Roke's room, and I see them at LAX. Now, there's no reason there can't be more than one man in the back of the head. How about an entire cast, existing as a film, reflecting what is occurring within the subconscious mind? Well, hopefully you get this idea. Notice also that there are 3 lights within the arch and directly over and even touching back of man's head that also can begin to reinforce this concept and create an additional sign to become part of an interpretive language that can be used to perceive the symbolic levels of the film. Now imagine that the film is depicting the troubled mind, ignorantly taking actions that cause it to remain in an internal repetitive cycle of desire leading to suffering. And we, as the viewer, are having our own minds reflected back to us in the form of a similar ignorance and confusion, typically being unable to understand the signs and symbolic language that are before our eyes Lynch is using to artistically portray his idea. A confusion which is close to the heart of the film's core and reflecting Lynch's own views related to meditation.
This is a donut. It is very sweet and very good.
But if you'd never tasted a donut, you wouldn't really know how sweet and how good a donut is if you'd never had that experience. Transcendental meditation is like that. Transcendental meditation gives an experience much sweeter than the sweetness of this donut. It gives the experience of the sweetest nectar of life, pure bliss consciousness. As Maharishi says, those who don't know, they don't know. Those who know, they enjoy.
This nicely dovetails with the idea of the film as an expressionistic artwork providing a physical form to a non-physical world inside the mind and related to philosophical concepts. Each of us exists in our own personal reality within our minds. Now, using this as a technique, it becomes possible to perceive a film language that can help us to recognize and understand what is right before our eyes, and that what may have seemed confusing can now become very simple and clear. Now, this begins to touch on another aspect of Buddhism in which our real physical world is an illusion, while our own consciousness is closer to reality, but we fail to recognize the signs. This has to do with what is called Maya. And now, Maya has various meanings. It is connected to illusion and reality of the universe and our inner selves. For example, it is possible to imagine the spiritual inner self as reality, while the physical material world to be an illusion. Now, I have to simplify and not get bogged down here because it is challenging to explain, but there is a great deal of material online that can provide a deeper explanation. Most people, we typically seek happiness through the physical material world for gratification, and we can easily ignore that happiness or contentment is really a state of mind that we each have the power to control. Too often we lose control to our own self-centered emotions and desires, and we ask, who is driving and controlling our buggy? Now, just very briefly, in Buddhism, there are what are called the Four Noble Truths. 1. There is suffering in life. 2. The cause of suffering is craving and ignorance. 3. We have the power to end the cycle of suffering. 4. There is a prescribed path we can follow to end the suffering and awaken our mind to become enlightened. The path to enlightenment is called the Eightfold Path, which is a set of 8 practices that involve insight, moral virtue, and meditation. Now, I've only provided a very basic and incomplete mention of these concepts, and there is so much that can be learned about Eastern thought that can be applied to the film. Yet even with this admittedly basic and very limited awareness of these principles, it is possible to reveal a fulfilling path to experiencing the film that can seem complete and unified without the loose ends associated with the physical narrative perspective that we typically expect to find. The concept of desire leading to suffering started to lead me in a direction that gradually unlocked the film in a remarkable way, where even seemingly random, meaningless background items have taken on a meaningful symbolic aspect that has added incredible richness. Related to that, but on another level, I have also come to perceive the film as an artistic model or representation of the unified field of consciousness, in that there are layers of levels that can be transcended through and lead to a deeper awareness and a beautiful enlightenment that is remarkable, simple, yet rich, fulfilling, and meaningful. As Lynch might say, pure bliss. Now, it is difficult to know where to begin, But let me try to provide an example of how it is possible to perceive a symbolic film language. Lynch was asked by the European distributor to provide 10 clues with the DVD release of how to unlock the film. And I will offer how to proceed, how these might fit into the point of view I'm presenting. The first clue is pay particular attention to the beginning of the film. At least 2 clues are revealed before the credits. I'll say this again. Pay particular attention in the beginning of the film. At least 2 clues are revealed before the credits. Before the credits. Okay. Let me preface by suggesting some simple symbolic elements to consider. First, among other things, darkness can be imagined as a symbol of ignorance and being unaware. Light can be thought of as a symbol that can provide illumination, knowledge, and awareness or enlightenment. But we have to be on the lookout for them and how these can be observed throughout the film, perhaps providing some direction or signs to discover another way to appreciate the film. Most viewers who consider this first clue generally choose to believe the credits that begin after the camera zooms into the red pillow to be what Lynch is referring to. Well, though typically ignored by most viewers who are analyzing this clue, the actual beginning of the film and the very first credits appear prior to the jitterbug dancing montage. Now, Lynch has indeed said that if you see the film one way, you will see the clue that way too. Now, if we ignore the universal logo that has to be at the very beginning, the actual beginning of Lynch's film opens with the all black or darkness seen on the screen, and we hear an eerie, empty sound. And this is immediately followed by the words in white text, Alan Sardé presents. Wow. Could this really be a clue? It's so instant short. Well, that is the actual beginning of the film, and those are indeed credits. And Lynch's clue tells us pay particular attention to the beginning and says there are at least 2 clues. Well, I will take him at his word. Using the meditative point of view, darkness that can symbolize ignorance, and is followed by the awareness or enlightenment with the knowledge Alan Sardé presents. It's really quite simple and poetic. Ignorance, enlightenment. Darkness, light. And now we also hear that eerie sound that is similar to the sound heard as the ending credits play, which nicely is framing or wrapping the film and could be symbolizing a repeating cycle as imagined in the Buddhist and other Eastern philosophical traditions. I have spliced these beginning credits together with the ending credits to illustrate this concept of the connective and recurring sound.
Listen.
Both could be considered as symbolic artistic clues that Lynch is providing. 2 clues, both to direct us towards another way to view and understand the film, using symbols and signs to go beyond the narrative to perhaps recognize something deeper, something that could be relating to the Buddhist concepts I've touched on. We expect to see the film as a story occurring in our real and physical world, yet it remains unresolved, without our own input to make up and fill in events we never see. like illusions.
It's unreal, right? Yeah.
I hope that this video can serve as an introduction to another way to appreciate the film. It is my first effort and could certainly use better editing and production, so please excuse me if it is a bit dreary. I will be providing additional analysis of the 10 clues and beyond, which will be explored, perhaps as a series of videos. Mulholland Drive really contains a great depth of interconnected, abstract, artistic expression that can be discovered and become increasingly apparent once beginning to perceive the symbolic elements as a film language. It is challenging to put into words, but hopefully you are getting a sense of this point of view and will find it as rich and beautiful as I do. Thank you for watching.